A quiet man living in a tiny shack at the edge of a small town was constantly mocked by his neighbors. To them, the tiny shack looked like proof that Benjamin Carter had nothing left in life. But what no one in Pine Hollow realized was that beneath that tiny shack, Benjamin Carter was secretly building something underground, something so extraordinary that one day the same neighbors who laughed at the tiny shack would stand in shock when they discovered what he had created. Subscribe for more powerful stories, and tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. The town of Pine Hollow, Colorado, sat quietly at the edge of a vast forest where the mountains stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Winters there had a strange way of slowing everything down. Snow gathered on rooftops, smoke curled gently from chimneys, and the whole town seemed to breathe a little softer beneath the gray sky. At the far end of a gravel road stood a small wooden shack. It leaned slightly to one side, its paint faded and its roof patched together with mismatched boards. Most people in town passed by it with a smirk. That shack belonged to Benjamin Carter. Benjamin was 41 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with the steady posture of someone who had spent years working hard with his hands. His beard was dark with threads of gray, and his quiet hazel eyes carried the distant look of a man who had seen storms most people never knew existed. He rarely spoke more than necessary. Every morning before sunrise, Benjamin stepped outside that tiny shack with his loyal German shepherd, Rocky, trotting faithfully beside him. While neighbors whispered and laughed about the poor man living in a broken hut, Benjamin simply nodded politely and went back to work. Because what nobody realized was that the real house Benjamin was building wasn't above the ground at all. It was deep beneath their feet. People in Pine Hollow had a way of noticing everything and understanding very little. From the outside, Benjamin Carter's place looked like the kind of shack you expected to collapse after the first heavy snow. The boards were uneven. The roof sagged slightly in the middle. In spring, muddy water pooled around the crooked wooden steps leading to the front door. Neighbors often slowed their trucks when passing by. Sometimes they laughed. Sometimes they shook their heads. "Man like that should have done better with his life," one of them once muttered at the gas station. Benjamin heard things like that from time to time, but he never argued. He simply kept working. Every morning before the sun touched the mountain peaks, Benjamin stepped outside with Rocky padding quietly beside him. The German shepherd was 6 years old, strong and alert, his thick brown and black coat catching the pale morning light. Wherever Benjamin went, Rocky followed without needing a command. Some mornings, Benjamin carried lumber. Other days, it was sacks of cement. And sometimes, he hauled heavy metal tools down a narrow wooden hatch hidden behind the shack. No one paid much attention to that hatch. Most people assumed it led to nothing more than an old root cellar. But beneath that shack, the ground had been slowly changing. For months, maybe longer. Inside, the tunnel Benjamin had carved beneath the earth stretched farther than anyone in town could imagine. Wooden beams reinforced the walls. Electrical wiring ran carefully along the ceiling. There were storage shelves, a small workshop area, and even a room large enough to sleep in. Benjamin worked there in silence most evenings. Rocky usually lay nearby, watching the entrance like a silent guard. But the reason Benjamin had started building underground in the first place wasn't something anyone in Pine Hollow knew. Not yet. The turning point came on a cold afternoon in late November. A gray sky hung low over the town, and thin flakes of snow drifted slowly through the air. Benjamin had just returned from fixing a broken fence on the far side of town when he stopped at the small post office on Main Street. Inside, the building smelled faintly of paper and old wood. Behind the counter stood Grace Whitmore, the town's longtime postmaster. She had lived in Pine Hollow for nearly 30 years, and knew almost everyone who passed through the door. When Benjamin stepped inside, she looked up. Her expression was different than usual. "Ben," she said quietly. Benjamin paused. Grace held a single envelope in her hand. "This came for you this morning." Benjamin walked toward the counter and took the letter. His name was written neatly across the front. The return address came from Denver, Colorado. Benjamin opened it slowly. The letter was short, but the words hit him harder than any storm he had ever faced. His younger sister, Rebecca Carter, had died 3 weeks earlier in a highway accident. For a long moment, Benjamin didn't move. The quiet room around him seemed to shrink. Grace watched him carefully. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. Benjamin folded the letter and slipped it back into the envelope. But Grace wasn't finished. "There's more," she added gently. Benjamin looked up. Grace reached for another document and slid it across the counter. "It says here, Rebecca had a daughter." Benjamin's brow tightened slightly. "A little girl," Grace continued, 10 years old. Benjamin toyed at the paper. Her name was Lily Carter. According to the letter, Lily had been living temporarily with distant relatives after the accident, but the arrangement wasn't working. Social services had begun searching for a legal guardian. Someone Rebecca had trusted. Someone who might be willing to take the girl in. Benjamin stood there for a long time without speaking. Outside, snow began falling harder against the windows. Finally, he turned and walked out of the post office. Rocky stood up immediately from the wooden porch where he had been waiting. The dog fell into step beside him as Benjamin walked slowly down the street. The wind was stronger now, pushing snow across the empty road. Neither of them made a sound. Back at the shack, Benjamin sat at the small wooden table near the window. The letter lay open in front of him. Rocky rested quietly at his feet. Benjamin stared at the page for a long time. Then, slowly, a memory surfaced. Rebecca laughing when they were younger, her voice teasing him for always trying to carry the weight of the world alone. "You know," she had once said years ago, "one day you're going to have to let someone into that stubborn heart of yours." Benjamin exhaled slowly. Outside, the wind rattled the thin walls of the shack. Inside the ground beneath it, the underground rooms waited silently. For the first time since he had begun building them, Benjamin realized something. Maybe those rooms had never been meant for just one man. Maybe they had been waiting for someone else to come home. The first heavy snow of the season came 2 weeks later. Pine Hollow woke that morning under a quiet white blanket. The forest behind Benjamin Carter's shack looked softer somehow, the tall pine trees standing still beneath the pale winter sky. Benjamin had been awake since before sunrise. Old habits from years of hard work had trained his body to rise early. Inside the small shack, a faint orange glow flickered from the wood stove, while thin lines of smoke drifted from the metal chimney above the roof. At the wooden table, Benjamin sat with a mug of black coffee. The letter from Denver still lay folded beside him. Across the room, Rocky lifted his head slightly. The German shepherd had heard something, a distant sound. An engine. Benjamin stood and walked toward the window. Through the frost on the glass, he could see a county vehicle slowly making its way up the narrow dirt road toward the shack. The tires struggled slightly against the fresh snow. Benjamin didn't move for a moment. He already knew why the car was coming. Outside, Rocky was already at the door, tail still but ears alert. A few minutes later, the vehicle stopped in front of the shack. The engine shut off. The door opened. A woman stepped out first, bundled in a thick winter coat. She walked around to the passenger side and opened the other door. For a moment, no one came out. Then, a small figure slowly stepped onto the snow. The girl was thin and small for her age, Lily Carter, 10 years old. Her dark brown hair fell messily over her shoulders, and the cold winter air made her pale skin look even lighter. She wore a coat that looked slightly too big for her, and clutched a small backpack tightly against her chest. Her eyes moved carefully across the unfamiliar place. The crooked shack, the quiet forest, the tall man standing in front of the door. Benjamin stepped forward slowly. The woman from the county office spoke first. "Mr. Carter?" she asked. Benjamin nodded. She gave a small, sympathetic smile. "We spoke on the phone last week." Benjamin nodded again. The woman crouched beside the girl. "Lily," she said gently, "this is your Uncle Benjamin." The girl didn't answer. She just looked at him. There was something in her eyes Benjamin recognized immediately. Not anger, not fear, just a quiet kind of sadness, the kind that comes when the world changes too quickly for a child to understand. Before Benjamin could say anything, Rocky stepped forward. The large German shepherd walked slowly across the snow until he stood a few feet in front of Lily. The girl froze. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Rocky looked at her carefully. Then, in a slow and deliberate motion, the dog lowered himself onto the snow and lay down at her feet. Not guarding, not warning, welcoming. Lily looked down at the big dog. Her small gloved hand hesitated, then slowly reached out. Rocky didn't move. Her fingers touched the thick fur along his neck. The dog's tail moved once against the snow. Just once. And for the first time since stepping out of the car, Lily smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just a small one. But Benjamin felt something shift quietly inside his chest when he saw it. The woman from the county office stood. "Well," she said softly, "I think that's a good start." She handed Benjamin a small envelope containing paperwork. "Call the number if you need anything," she added. Benjamin nodded. Within a few minutes, the car drove away, its tire tracks slowly fading under the falling snow. And just like that, the quiet shack at the edge of Pine Hollow was no longer empty. Benjamin looked down at the girl standing beside Rocky. "Cold out here," he said gently. Lily nodded. Her voice was small when she finally spoke. "Can Rocky come inside too?" Benjamin glanced at the dog. Rocky was already walking toward the door. Benjamin allowed himself the faintest smile. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think he already lives here." Inside the shack, the air was warm from the stove. Lily stepped in carefully, looking around at the small room. The crooked walls, the wooden table, the simple bed in the corner. It wasn't much, but it was quiet, safe. Rocky walked beside her, never more than a step away. Benjamin set another cup on the table and poured warm milk into it. Lily sat down slowly. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Outside, the snow continued falling softly over Pine Hollow. And beneath the small shack, hidden under layers of earth and timber, the underground rooms waited silently, because neither Benjamin nor Lily realized it yet, but the place Benjamin had been building underground was about to become something far greater than a shelter. It was going to become a second chance. For both of them. The first weeks after Lily Carter arrived at the shack passed quietly. Winter settled deeper over Pine Hollow, and the forest surrounding Benjamin's small home stood still beneath layers of snow. Most mornings began the same way. Before sunrise, Benjamin Carter woke to the faint crackling sound of the wood stove. He moved quietly through the small room, careful not to wake Lily too early. Years of discipline had taught him how to move without making noise. He cooked simple breakfasts, eggs when he had them, oatmeal when he didn't. Across the table, Lily usually sat quietly, her hands wrapped around a warm mug. She spoke very little during those first days, The grief of losing her mother had not left her yet. Benjamin never pushed her to talk. He understood something about silence, but Rocky had a different approach. The large German Shepherd had quickly decided that Lily required constant supervision. If she moved across the room, Rocky stood up. If she sat by the window looking out at the forest, Rocky lay down beside her chair. Sometimes he even brought her things. An old tennis ball Benjamin had found months earlier, a rope toy from Rocky's training days. Once, he even carried in a pine cone from outside and dropped it carefully into Lily's lap. At first, Lily only looked at the gifts, but she never pushed Rocky away. Little by little, something began to change. One afternoon, nearly a month after Lily arrived, the winter sky finally cleared. Soft sunlight slipped through the tall pine trees behind the shack. Benjamin was outside chopping wood when he noticed Lily standing in the doorway, watching him. Rocky sat beside her like a patient guard. "Want to take a walk?" Benjamin asked. Lily hesitated. Then she nodded. The snow behind the shack had begun to melt slightly, leaving narrow paths between the trees. Benjamin walked ahead while Lily and Rocky followed closely behind. They didn't go far, just deep enough into the forest where the sounds of the town disappeared. For a while, no one spoke. Then Lily stopped. She was staring at the ground. Benjamin turned. A patch of earth nearby looked different. Not snow-covered, not frozen, just disturbed. Before Benjamin could say anything, Rocky suddenly ran forward. The German Shepherd began pawing at the ground enthusiastically, dirt scattering behind him. "Ruck," Benjamin called, but the dog kept digging. Within seconds, his paws struck something wooden. Benjamin stepped closer. Part of the ground gave way slightly, revealing a square wooden hatch hidden beneath the soil and pine needles. Benjamin froze. For a moment, he considered covering it back up, but Lily had already stepped closer. "What's that?" she asked softly. Benjamin sighed quietly. "Well," he said, "I guess you're about to find out." He brushed away the remaining dirt and lifted the hatch. A wooden ladder disappeared into the darkness below. Lily's eyes widened. "Is that a basement?" she asked. Benjamin gave a small, uncertain smile. "It's something like that." They climbed down slowly. The moment Lily's feet touched the ground, she stopped completely. The underground room stretched far wider than anything she had expected. Wooden support beams lined the wall. Soft electric lights glowed overhead. Shelves filled with tools, supplies, and carefully stacked lumber filled one side of the space. Another room extended beyond it, and another. Lily turned slowly in a circle. This was under the shack. The whole time she whispered. Benjamin nodded. He looked slightly embarrassed. "I started building it about a year ago." "Why?" Lily asked. Benjamin leaned against one of the wooden beams. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then he spoke quietly. "After your mom passed away, I didn't really know what I was building it for anymore." Lily looked around the underground rooms again. "But it's huge," she said. Benjamin shrugged. "I guess I just kept digging." Rocky wandered through the room proudly, his tail wagging as if he were giving Lily a tour. Lily stepped into the larger chamber at the far end. The room was nearly the size of a small house. A workbench stood in one corner. A row of empty spaces lined the walls. "Were you going to live down here?" she asked. Benjamin shook his head. "No." He looked around slowly. "I think I was building something safer." For what Lily asked quietly, Benjamin didn't answer right away. Then he looked at her. "Maybe," he said softly, "for someone who might need it someday." For a moment, Lily didn't move. Then something unexpected happened. She walked over and wrapped her arms around him. Benjamin stiffened slightly, surprised. Then slowly, very carefully, he placed a hand on her shoulder. Above them, the small shack stood quietly in the winter forest. And for the first time since it was built, the underground place beneath it finally felt like it had a purpose. Winter slowly began to loosen its grip on Pine Hollow. The thick snow that had covered the forest for months started melting into narrow streams that ran between the trees. Patches of brown earth appeared again, and the cold silence of winter gave way to the quiet sounds of birds returning to the valley. Life inside the small shack had begun to settle into a rhythm. Each morning, Benjamin Carter woke before the sun and lit the stove. The warm smell of burning pine wood filled the room, while Rocky stretched lazily near the door. Across the table sat Lily Carter, now more comfortable in the small space than when she had first arrived. Her long, dark hair was usually tied into a loose ponytail, and sometimes when she thought Benjamin wasn't looking, she would hum quietly while eating breakfast. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It felt peaceful. But something else had changed too. Lily had become fascinated with the underground rooms Benjamin had built beneath the shack. Almost every afternoon after school, she asked if she could go down there. Benjamin never said no. Sometimes she sat at the long wooden workbench, drawing pictures in a small notebook. Other times she simply wandered through the rooms while Rocky followed her like a loyal shadow. One afternoon in early March, Lily was exploring one of the storage shelves when she noticed something tucked behind a stack of old toolboxes, a small metal container. Dust had gathered thickly across the lid. "Uncle Ben," she called. Benjamin looked up from the workbench where he had been repairing a broken lantern. "What is it?" "I found something." He walked over slowly. Lily pushed the box forward. Benjamin wiped the dust away with his sleeve. The metal surface beneath looked old, older than anything else stored underground. "What is it?" Lily asked. Benjamin didn't answer right away. Instead, he carefully lifted the lid. Inside were several folded papers tied together with a faded piece of twine. Benjamin's brow tightened slightly. He untied the string and opened the first sheet. It wasn't a letter. It was a hand-drawn map. The paper had yellowed with age, but the lines were still clear. The map showed the forest around Pine Hollow, with small markings and notes written along the edges. Lily leaned closer. "What does it mean?" Benjamin studied it for a long moment. Then something flickered in his memory. Years earlier, when Rebecca had still been alive, she used to talk about something their father had dreamed of building. Benjamin slowly unfolded another sheet. This one was a letter written in careful handwriting. It was from their father. Benjamin began reading quietly. The letter spoke about the land surrounding Pine Hollow and a vision he had once hoped to create. A safe haven, not just for people, but for animals. Stray dogs wandering through the forests. Injured wildlife with nowhere to go. Creatures that had been abandoned or forgotten. Their father had believed the valley could become a place where those animals could recover instead of suffering alone in the wilderness. Benjamin had been too young back then to understand, and life had pulled him away from Pine Hollow long before the idea could ever become real. But now, holding the map in his hands, the memory felt suddenly alive again. Lily looked up at him. "Was it your dad's idea?" she asked softly. Benjamin nodded slowly. "He wanted to build a sanctuary out here," he said, "a place where animals could be safe." Lily glanced around the underground room. Then she looked back at the map. "Like a rescue," Benjamin nodded again. "Something like that." Rocky, who had been lying near the ladder, stood up and walked over. The German shepherd placed his large head gently against Lily's shoulder. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Lily said something so quietly, Benjamin almost didn't hear it. "Maybe We still could. Benjamin looked at her. Lily pointed toward the map. The forest is still here, she said. And you already built half of it. She gestured around the underground rooms. Benjamin followed her gaze. The reinforced tunnels, the storage spaces, the large chamber that could easily hold dozens of animals if needed. He had built it all without really knowing why. Now, suddenly, the answer seemed obvious. Benjamin folded the map carefully. Then he placed it back inside the metal box. When he looked up again, Lily was still watching him. Her eyes carried something new now. Hope. Benjamin exhaled slowly. Well, he said, I guess we've got some work to do. Rocky's tail thumped happily against the wooden floor, and somewhere in the quiet forest above them, a future that had once been forgotten was about to begin again. Spring came quietly to Pine Hollow. The snow melted from the forest floor, leaving behind damp earth and the fresh scent of pine needles warming under the sun. Small streams began running again through the valley, and the long silence of winter slowly gave way to birdsong in the trees. For Benjamin Carter, the days had grown busier than ever. Every morning after breakfast, he and Lily walked out behind the shack toward the open land that stretched between the forest and the edge of town. At first, it didn't look like much. Just uneven ground, a few old fence posts, tall grass that had grown wild over the years. But according to the old map they had found underground, this land had once belonged to Benjamin's father. And now, slowly, piece by piece, they were bringing it back to life. Benjamin began by repairing the old fence line. His strong hands worked patiently, replacing broken posts and hammering new boards into place. Lily followed behind him, carrying nails in a small bucket almost half her size. And of course, Rocky was never far away. The German shepherd moved constantly around the property like a quiet guardian, his sharp ears always listening to the forest. At first, the townspeople didn't pay much attention. They were used to seeing Benjamin working alone. But one afternoon, something happened that changed everything. Benjamin had been lifting a heavy wooden beam when Rocky suddenly froze. The dog's ears lifted. His nose twitched toward the tree line. Then, without warning, Rocky ran into the forest. Rocky, Lily called. Benjamin wiped sweat from his forehead and followed. They didn't have to go far, just beyond the trees. Rocky was standing beside a fallen log. At first, Benjamin didn't see what the dog was looking at. Then something moved. A small stray dog slowly crawled out from behind the log. The animal was painfully thin. Its tan fur was dirty and patchy, and one of its legs trembled slightly when it tried to stand. The dog looked frightened, ready to run, but Rocky didn't chase it. Instead, the large German shepherd sat down calmly a few feet away. His posture was relaxed, friendly, patient. Slowly, the stray stopped backing away. Lily stepped forward carefully. "Oh no," she whispered. Benjamin crouched beside the injured dog. "It's okay," he said softly. The animal's ribs showed clearly beneath its coat. But when Benjamin reached out, it didn't bite. Within minutes, Lily had wrapped the small dog in her jacket. They carried it back toward the shack together. That night, the stray slept in a box beside the wood stove. Lily named him Scout. Something unexpected happened after that. A few days later, Rocky disappeared into the forest again. This time he returned with another dog. Then another. Some were lost. Some were injured. Others simply looked hungry and exhausted from wandering too long through the woods. And every single time, Rocky was the one who found them. Lily fed them. Benjamin built small wooden shelters for them beside the fence. Soon, there were 5 dogs. Then 8, then 12. People in Pine Hollow started noticing. At first, it was just whispers at the gas station. "Have you seen what Carter's doing out there? Man's turning that land into some kind of dog camp." Then, one afternoon, an old pickup truck rolled slowly up the dirt road toward the property. Behind the wheel sat Tom Bennett, Pine Hollow's longtime carpenter. Tom stepped out of the truck and looked across the field. Dogs ran through the grass while Lily chased after them, laughing. Benjamin was repairing a gate. Tom scratched his gray beard thoughtfully. "Looks like you got yourself a project here, you kind of the hack," he said. Benjamin nodded. "Something like that." Tom watched the animals for a moment. Then he walked back to his truck. From the bed of the pickup, he pulled out several long wooden beams. "Figured you might need these," he said. Benjamin blinked. "You don't have to." Tom waved a hand. "Your dad helped build half the barns in this valley," he said. "Seems fair someone helps his son." 2 days later, another truck arrived. Then another. Some brought lumber. Others brought bags of dog food. A few people simply showed up with tools. Slowly, the empty land behind Benjamin's shack began to change. Fences grew stronger. Shelters multiplied. Dogs ran freely across the field. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the mountains, Lily stood beside Benjamin at the fence line. She watched Rocky running across the grass with Scout and several other dogs chasing behind him. Her voice was quiet. "Uncle Ben?" Benjamin looked down. "Yeah." Lily smiled. "It's starting to look like a real home." Benjamin followed her gaze across the field. For a long time after returning to Pine Hollow, he had felt like a man without direction. But now, watching the dogs, hearing Lily laugh, seeing neighbors slowly begin to help, Benjamin realized something. The small shack everyone had once laughed at had become the beginning of something much bigger, and the town that once ignored him was finally starting to understand. Summer arrived gently in Pine Hollow. The long days stretched across the valley beneath a wide blue sky, and the land behind Benjamin Carter's small shack had transformed into something no one in town had ever expected. Where there had once been empty grass and broken fences, there were now rows of wooden shelters. Fresh pine boards formed strong new gates along the property line. Water bowls and feeding stations were scattered across the field, and everywhere you looked, dogs ran freely through the warm summer grass. Some chased tennis balls. Some wrestled playfully beneath the shade of the trees. Others simply rested in the sunlight, finally safe after years of wandering alone. At the entrance to the property, a simple wooden sign now hung from 2 sturdy posts. The letters had been carved carefully by hand. Carter Haven Animal Sanctuary. It had taken nearly a year to build, and the whole town had helped. On a bright Saturday morning, pickup trucks slowly rolled down the dirt road toward the sanctuary. Families stepped out. Children ran ahead excitedly. Word had spread through Pine Hollow that Benjamin was opening the sanctuary to visitors for the first time. Near the main gate, Benjamin stood quietly beside the fence. He looked different now than he had a year earlier. His tall frame was still strong, but the heaviness that once lingered in his posture had softened. His beard was trimmed shorter, and his eyes carried a calm steadiness that hadn't been there before. Beside him sat Rocky. The German shepherd was now 7 years old, his thick coat shining in the sunlight. A few gray hairs had begun to appear around his muzzle, but his sharp, intelligent eyes still watched everything around the property. Not far away, a familiar voice echoed across the field. "Scout, bring it back." Lily Carter ran across the grass, laughing as 3 dogs sprinted after the tennis ball she had thrown. The girl who had once arrived in Pine Hollow silent and heartbroken had changed completely. Now 11 years old, she moved with confidence across the sanctuary grounds. Her dark hair bounced behind her as she ran. Her laughter filled the warm summer air. Nearby, Scout, the first stray Rocky had ever brought home, raced proudly beside her. The once frightened dog had grown strong and healthy, his coat thick and bright under the sunlight. Visitors walked slowly through the property, amazed at what they saw. Dogs resting peacefully, shelters filled with rescued animals, wide open space where creatures that had once been abandoned now lived safely. Near the gate, Tom Bennett leaned against his old pickup truck with a satisfied grin. Not bad for a man living in a broken shack, he chuckled. Benjamin smiled quietly. I guess it worked out. Tom glanced toward the field where Lily was kneeling beside a new puppy. You did good, Ben, he said simply. Benjamin didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked across the sanctuary, the land that had once been empty, the dogs running freely, the neighbors who had once laughed, now helping care for the animals. For a long time after losing his sister, Benjamin had believed his life had no direction. He thought the small shack in the woods was all he had left. But somewhere between building those underground rooms, rescuing the first starving dog, and watching Lily slowly learn how to smile again, something had changed. He had found purpose. Lily suddenly ran toward him from across the field. Uncle Ben. Benjamin turned. What is it? She pointed excitedly toward the far side of the property. 2 new dogs just showed up near the creek. Tom laughed. Looks like Rocky's recruiting program is still working. Rocky wagged his tail once, as if proudly accepting the compliment. Lily stood beside Benjamin and looked out across the sanctuary. Her voice softened. Do you think Mom would like this place? Benjamin rested a gentle hand on her shoulder. He looked across the field again. The dogs, the people, the life that had grown from what once looked like nothing more than a tiny shack in the woods. Yes, he said quietly. I think she'd be very proud. Lily slipped her hand into his. Rocky lay down beside them in the warm grass with a contented sigh. And as the sun dipped slowly toward the mountains, Benjamin Carter realized something he hadn't understood before. Sometimes the things people laugh at the most turn out to be the things that change the world the most. And sometimes, the smallest shack in town is hiding the biggest heart beneath the ground. Sometimes the greatest things in life begin in places the world overlooks. A small shack, a forgotten piece of land, a single act of kindness. Because when someone chooses compassion instead of bitterness, even the quietest life can become something that changes an entire community. And that's a reminder we all need from time to time. Never judge a story before you've seen what's being built beneath the surface. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who might need a little hope today. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories about courage, compassion, and the quiet miracles that happen every day.